Next panel, Sandra Steingraber, Ph.D., Distinguished Scholar in Residence, Ithaca College. Ronald E. Bishop, Ph.D., Lecturer, SUNY College at Oneonta. And Jannette M. Barth, Ph.D., Economist, Pepacton Institute, LLC. Welcome back to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
My name is Sandra Steingraber. I am a distinguished scholar in residence in the Department of Environmental Studies at Ithaca College. My PhD is in biology, and I have spent the last 20 years researching and writing in the field of environmental health. I've served as science advisor at both the state and national level, working with the state of California on its research program to investigate environmental links to breast cancer, and with both the National Action Plan on Breast Cancer under the Clinton administration and the President's Cancer Panel under George W. Bush. I'm here to speak today as the founding member of Concerned Health Professionals of New York. This is a group of scientists, physicians, and nurses that came together this fall in a spirit of shared alarm when we heard that the DEC's studies of the health effects of fracking, which we had long asked for, was not going to be conducted using any normative protocols, nor in an open manner, which is also normative for public health inquiries. And in my written comments to you, I will describe how a comprehensive health impact assessment designed by our CDC is used as that normative tool. But what I want to say now is that what's going on here with the so-called health study underway at the DEC and DOH is the very opposite of that public spiritedness. The DEC has, under cover of secrecy, scoped and carried out a health review of some kind that no member of New York's scientific community has seen. This is being reviewed by DOH Chief Dr. Shah and a team of 3 distinguished public health experts from out of state. We do not know what this team has been asked to review, but we do know that 2 of the 3 of them have signed contracts with non-disclosure agreements. We do know from the introduction to the newly released regulations for hydraulic fracturing released by the DEC on November 29th that the decision whether or not to frack New York hangs on the results of these outside reviewers. Thus, does the health of 19.5 million New Yorkers depend on the results of a secret review of a secret review? Thus, Concerned Health Professionals of New York came together. Not knowing what data the reviewers have been asked to comment on, we hastily, we and Concerned Health Professionals, we created a website on which we uploaded all the important peer-reviewed studies and along with our unanswered letters to DEC Commissioner Martens, DOH Commissioner Shah, and Governor Cuomo. And I'd like to add here as an aside, my 11-year-old son receives answers to his letters to the governor. I never have, and we share the same mailing address. Concerned Health Professionals of New York also took the unusual step of
I would say there's an obvious solution there.
Thank you for that. We've taken the unusual step of creating an 8-minute video message to the 3 outside panelists in which we, doctors, nurses, and scientists, and I would say Dr. David Carpenter, who you heard from this morning, was one of them, we describe our long-standing addressed concerns about fracking in New York. So we actually use YouTube as an instrument to get our concerns as scientists to our fellow scientists. And can I just say how crazy this feels to us? These 3 outside experts are our colleagues, and 2 of them are personal friends of mine. We speak together on panels, at conferences, we share data, I cite their research in my writings, and now a gag order prevents them from speaking to me about data that I, as a New York scientist, am not allowed to see. A leak last week to the press of an old draft of this health review turns our alarm to full-blown cynicism. This 8-page document contains no data. It's a series of assertions that seems to say that the health effects of fracking are unknown and unknowable by any future research, therefore regulations can mitigate the risks. That's not sound scientific reasoning. The scientific community has many questions, and we openly condemn the statement of Emily DeSantis, who announced that the DEC would be refusing to speak at this hearing. Not only is the promise of transparency broken, but the public trust itself is broken by this comment.
Please.
Although New York citizens have entirely cut out of this process, the public continues to have profound interest in participating in the inquiry and the decision-making process on fracking. I know this because I designed a website to help people create comments on the revised draft regulation over the holidays. It's called 30 Days of Fracking Regs, and it takes an advent calendar approach to responding to fracking. So on each day of the 30-day comment period, I've posted one reg each day and then translated it into plain English and provided some science that is relevant to that regulation because we have no S-guys to use it for judgment. And then I invited people to create their own handcrafted comment. So we're now on track by tomorrow to have more than 20,000 comments, handwritten comments from the public. 500 of those were actually composed and submitted on Christmas Day, 1,000 of them on New Year's Day. We have college students on home on break who are working on something called Homework Against Fracking, in which they're responding to the regulations. Other initiatives by other organizations are also helping people create comments. And so we're now on track by tomorrow to hand deliver to the DEC more than 200,000 public comments, and we're going to have to rent a U-Haul to bring them there. So I am asking you to help ensure that these comments are logged in by the DEC and read and considered. Yesterday, more than 1,500 people protested outside of Governor Cuomo's State of the State remarks, and as part of that protest, a pledge of resistance was taken in which people promised to lay down their bodies on the street and engage in peaceful acts of nonviolent acts of resistance and protest should the governor move forward with fracking with this kind of public health, public participation not allowed. We now have 6,000 people who have signed the Pledge of Resistance Against Fracking, and I am one of them. This movement represents not only a loss of faith in the DEC, but a loss of faith in government itself. I hope that this pledge will never have to be activated, and that we move immediately in New York State to regain our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
To the Honorable Robert Sweeney, Richard Gottlieb, Charles Levine, other members of the New York State Assembly, engaged New Yorkers and friends, my name is Ron Bishop, and I really thank you for the opportunity to speak here. For those of you who don't know me, both of you, I am a biochemist with more than 30 years of experience in advancing science. I'll skip some of the rest that I've written here. In addition to my experience in science and teaching, of course, now at SUNY Oneonta, I have a robust background in construction as a licensed commercial industrial electrician, and that's given me a unique perspective on this industrial process. Since the summer of 2008, I've been studying and assessing the petroleum industry in New York and elsewhere, with special focus on the production of oil and natural gas from shale. I should say I apologize for some of the typos in these brief comments that I provided you with, and I'll provide you with some more complete comments a little later. In addition to the ordinary holiday festivities, I've had a death in the family, and it's just complicated things a little bit. The draft regulations we're considering today on high-volume hydraulic fracturing, and I would call them HVHF from here on out, operations in the state, probably violate the State Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, since they're being presented ahead of their guidance documents which are supposed to inform them. However, from the viewpoint of a chemist and a construction professional, they're not too early, they're 20 years too late. The chemical additives which have been used for the completion of wells in tight sand formations are the same as the chemical additives used for HVHF projects. The same drilling muds, the same lubricants, the same biocides, the same corrosion and scale inhibitors, same flocculants. I'm in a position to know. All the same except for the amounts that are used. The brines produced by the traditional wells are similar in very many ways to those that are produced by the high-volume projects. So the chemist in me asks, how could the wells hydraulically fractured across New York State in the Queenston, Medina, Oriskany, Herkimer, Oneida, Clinton, and other tight sands, how could they possibly have been permitted legally without the regulations package which never materialized following the adoption of the generic environmental impact statement in 1992? And the conservative taxpayer construction professional in me asks, in what sense has it been fair that drillers and their subcontractors were subjected to the caprice of DEC permit conditions for all these 20 years without any regulatory floor? Now, answers to these questions are important today because none of the proposed new regulations will fix the old problems I just mentioned. The improved definitions, chemical disclosure and handling procedures, waste disposal requirements, although they're not perfect, they're all sequestered in a new Title VI, Part 560. They're neither harmonized with nor reflected in Mineral Resources, Parts 560 to 567. They're not adequately harmonized with the Air Quality Division's regulations in Part 257. They're not at all harmonized with the Solid Waste Regulations, Parts 360, 364, or 371. And there's a minimal attempt to harmonize them with the Division of Water Regulations in Part 750. So, New York still lacks the rules package that was supposed to follow the 1992 GEIS. And the problem of scope goes deeper. The proposed regulations regarding the process wastes may describe when operators are permitted to release wastes to the air, but they don't say anything about monitoring or mitigating them, even though airborne wastes are known to cause some of the greatest health problems for people who live near petroleum production areas. Anybody who suggests that the air quality impacts are temporary has obviously not thought through the permanent debilitating effects of asthma, other forms of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or the gastrointestinal ravages that are induced by inhaling volatile organic compound-coated diesel exhaust particulates. Now, on the bright side, the proposed regulations do include some significant improvements for abandoned well plugging requirements, without saying anything about our great number of abandoned wells that never got plugged in the first place. However, they perpetuate the myth that once an oil or gas well is plugged, it may safely be ignored until the end of time. No monitoring program exists or is proposed. This assumption has no foundation in science and therefore has no place in New York's regulations. In summary, I believe that the proposed new HVHF regulations are both too late and too early. They're too late and insufficient at that because for 2 decades, no regulatory foundation, not even a rudimentary one, has existed in New York for petroleum projects completed by hydraulic fracturing. They're too early because the required hard look has not been taken. They are incomplete in scope and inadequate in formulation. As written, they don't protect developers from possibly capricious permit requirements by agency officials, and in no way do they protect the general public or the state's ecosystems from undue exposure to harmful chemicals. I respectfully recommend that you reject them and send them back to the drawing board. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Dr. Barth?
My name is Jannette Barth. I'm a Ph.D. economist, formerly chief economist of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and I'm currently principal of Pepacton Institute, an economic research and consulting firm. Thank you for inviting me to testify. Comments submitted by independent economists to the DEC in response to the revised draft SGEIS were ignored in the drafting of the regulations. And the DEC has neglected to consider independent and peer-reviewed economic research in both the SGEIS and in the regulations. The DEC has been using highly exaggerated job growth estimates and has not properly accounted for costs. Some of the peer-reviewed and industry-independent economic impact findings include the following. Job growth is overstated in studies sponsored by the gas industry. Recent peer-reviewed research in other states have found only small positive impacts on income, employment, and population as a result of oil and gas extraction. And a piece that focused on short-term impact found only modest increases in employment, wage, and salary income. And a quote, "The risk of groundwater contamination from natural gas extraction leads to a large and significant reduction in house prices. And these reductions offset any gains to owners from lease payments or improved local economic conditions." Research in Pennsylvania concluded most local governments being affected by shale gas development are not seeing more tax revenue as a result, while 26% of the local governments indicated that related costs had increased. Another quote, "The areas of the United States having the highest levels of long-term poverty tend to be found in the very places that were once the site of thriving extractive industries." And a very recent report out of West Virginia, also in the Marcellus Shale, shows that the expected game-changing gas boom has not materialized there. In 4 years of shale gas drilling, only 916 jobs were created in West Virginia. And the unemployment rate in the 4 core drilling counties has risen since drilling began, and their workforces have declined in size. The sources of each of these conclusions and more are in my comments that were submitted to the DEC and attached to my testimony. These findings are vastly different from the statements made by gas industry representatives, the gas industry ads on TV and radio, economic consulting firms who are paid by the industry, much of the media, and sadly, even our DEC. How can the public develop an informed view when only one side of the story is aired, even by our DEC? Failure to include the conclusions of relevant peer-reviewed research may indicate ignorance, carelessness, and possibly even bias on the part of the DEC. Another major flaw in the regulations is the fact that significant costs are not properly considered. The regulations state that there will be additional costs to 4 of the major New York State governmental departments, but they then state that the additional costs cannot be estimated at this time. How can the DEC, the department that is tracked with evaluating costs and benefits of the regulations, fail to make even an educated guess of such additional costs and still call it an adequate job? The regulations mention costs to local governments, including additional paperwork requirements for waste tracking, permitting, and testing, emergency response activities, costs associated with road maintenance. They say that local governments may want to proactively retain professional services to assist with emergency response and traffic control. They say there will be cost impacts to county health departments who respond to complaints about water quality, and they say that these costs cannot be quantified. The regulations state that local governments will have to monitor operators and owners in the fracking process to ensure the health, safety, and the environment are adequately protected. So the DEC is pushing much of the cost of safety monitoring onto local governments. This will be very expensive for communities. The DEC has not estimated any of the above costs, and the DEC has not even mentioned a number of additional and very significant costs that will be incurred. Examples of ignored costs include the costs associated with declines in other industries that are vital to the upstate economy, but are not compatible with an industrial landscape or with the real or perceived threat of water, air, and land contamination. And there will be crowding out of small existing businesses during the short-term boom of gas extraction. And then there are the costs of the long-term bust, characteristic of extractive industries. Experience in the Barnett Shale and independent research indicate that property values are likely to decline. Declines in property values means that declines in property tax revenues will follow. The regulations state public entities may be able to use increased tax and other revenue generated through fracking activities to offset any increased burden on the services it provides. How can the DEC make this statement when they have failed to estimate the additional costs to localities and made only questionable assumptions about tax revenues? Without such estimates, the DEC's statements are little more than speculation, and the independent research that I summarized earlier indicates the DEC is likely to be flat out wrong in its speculation. I am including with my testimony a copy of 2 letters. One is a letter from 3 professional Ph.D. economists that was sent over a year ago to Governor Cuomo and Commissioner Martens, to which we received no reply. That letter criticized the economic assessment in the revised draft SGEIS. The second letter is one that Commissioner Martens sent to the president of the Joint Landowners Coalition of New York in response to a letter from the coalition. In this letter, Commissioner Martens states that Governor Cuomo asked him to write the letter, and he states, quote, DEC recognizes the potential economic benefits high-volume hydrofracking would have for landowners and the communities. This letter confirms that Commissioner Martens and Governor Cuomo have their own set of facts. Their facts are starkly inconsistent with peer-reviewed and independent economic research. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Barth. Dr. Steingraber, so what should be included in a thorough analysis to determine the potential health impacts associated with the high-volume hydrofracking?
Well, the comprehensive health impact assessment, which I mentioned, is a tool designed to do just that. It was developed by our Centers for Disease Control and has been endorsed by the World Health Organization. And that is an instrument and a set of protocols that is used to forecast the impact of a polluting industry on public health. What's unique about it is that it allows you to model health effects and forecast them before you actually unroll the industry, right? And so you're not then you're not guinea pigging out the activity by turning everyone into unwitting subjects in a great human experiment. Instead, we have very good modeling tools to use that would allow us to estimate what the health effects would be, and then, if mitigation has been suggested, to put the mitigations into the model to then see if we can prevent and protect people from harm to an acceptable level. And so these comprehensive HIAs require public notice, they require public scoping, and they require public hearings. So there's an element of democracy built into them. They recognize that when people's health is at stake, that the people who are going to be affected should have the right to contribute their knowledge as to what this health study should look like. So for example, the 3 outside reviewers are looking at some kind of data that we don't know. All of them are from out of state in New York. People who live in the southern tier, who will be on the front lines of fracking, might be able, if they were allowed to be part of the design of a study, they might point out that in the southern tier, the housing stock is actually located very near our rural roads, because these roads were built in the 19th century to help farmers bring grain to market. And so the houses, the older homes, are built right next to the roads. So if you have fleets and fleets of diesel trucks going down those roads, the amount of diesel exposure that the children living in those homes experience is going to be far greater than, let's say, somewhere out west where the homes are built much farther from the roads. So the local knowledge of the people themselves would help us design the studies in order to ask, for example, well, if we allow fracking to go forward with this amount of gas venting, which is, we know is in the regs, with this amount of flaring from the flare stacks, with these compressors and condensers and these number of trucks on the road, we could very easily, using models that the EPA itself has designed, determine what the uptick will be in ground level ozone. And then we could actually project very accurately how many more children in New York will have asthma, how many more preterm births there will be, and so forth. And then from there, we can decide whether this is mitigatable or not. We can actually use a comprehensive health impact assessment to price out the health studies. We know we have very good data, for example, that every child with asthma has a certain price tag associated. Children with asthma have thousands of extra healthcare dollars are spent on them. They tend to miss 4 to 5 more days of school a year, and they tend to cause their parents to miss an average of 5 days of work, so there's a cost to worker productivity as well. So we have all of these models available. We have the economic statistics available, especially for air pollution, and we could run the numbers to determine how many New Yorkers are going to get sick and die if fracking is brought to New York. And can we bring those numbers down or not, and how much is all that going to cost?
Thank you. Dr. Bishop, you indicated that the well plugging requirements represent improvements in the new rules.
Yeah, they really do.
Okay. So what aspects are you referring to, and are there additional improvements that need to be made?
Sir, the improvements basically go to, I suppose, a measure of scale, where we had standing concrete columns that needed to be put in pipes of 15 feet, now they're 50. Where they were 25, now they're 100. That's really better. Where the intervals between the segments of concrete that have to go into the pipe, where they could put in, for example, what we would call, for lack of a better word, plastic spacers, they now have to be put in with, have to install a packer slurry, which is a technical term for some heavy viscous drilling mud that doesn't have a lot of tensile strength, but it's really good at sealing up cracks. So those are all pretty nice. The regulations as they propose them going forward for plugging abandoned wells are significantly improved over what we've seen before. What comes short, aside from the fact that we have thousands of wells continuing unplugged, even though they've been inactive for years, where we come short is there's no mechanism in the state to actually follow, track, or any other way monitor a well once it's been plugged. And data coming especially out of Alberta, Canada, suggests that up to 4% of plugged abandoned wells go on to leak in a time frame of about 25 years or so. There's only one study, and with that kind of a limited data, I don't want to push it too far, but the idea of set it and forget it is a dog that won't run. There's no such thing. And so without a monitoring program, an ongoing monitoring program for plugged abandoned wells, we have an incomplete regulatory system. Of course, as you probably know from earlier encounters with me, we're still in a situation where we have so many unknown geography, unplugged abandoned wells that the whole idea of, should we plug them better is almost a moot point until we start getting the backlog plugged. But yeah, I think that those procedures and those plans are a significant improvement over what we've seen before.
Thank you. Dr. Barth, in your testimony, you say there may be as your words, net adverse impact on jobs and employment in the Marcellus region as a result of increased shale gas extraction. Can you tell us why you believe that?
Yes, it is possible because the numbers have not really been estimated. The regulations are based on the economic assessment that was done for the SGEIS, and you can see in my comments that were submitted in the SGEIS a number of reasons why those job estimates are highly exaggerated. But some of the reasons that they're exaggerated are the fact that declines in other potential declines in other industries are ignored. I mentioned industries that are not compatible with an industrial landscape or with the risk of air, land, and water contamination. Those industries would include industries such as tourism, agriculture, organic farming, hunting, fishing, winemaking, beer making, yogurt making, and other outdoor recreation. The upstate communities depend on those industries. We need to have proper analysis done, possibly detailed surveys done to see how much those industries are likely to be impacted. They may be impacted only by the perceived threat, much less the actual contamination. So we have to be very, very careful. Another thing that the SGEIS study does not take account of when it's talking about job growth, it doesn't take account of the decline in existing small businesses when a short-term boom type industry like shale gas development comes in and can attract workers away from businesses that can't afford to pay the same high wages. So by the time the resource is gone and the industry leaves, a lot of the small businesses have already closed up, and it's very tough to get things started again. You've seen this kind of thing in Appalachia and in communities that have experienced a lot of shale gas, or not just shale gas, but extractive industries in the past. So in other words, the numbers, when you look at jobs, it does not reflect the possibility of a decline in all of these other things. And over the long run, it's very likely that the total number of jobs would decline because this is really a short-term boom phenomenon, shale gas development.
Right, and then once you've killed off industries that may exist like tourism or whatever, I guess you don't get those back later on when the drilling activity is done. Is that essentially it?
That's essentially it. And then there's also the aspect of the pipeline network that has to be built. The tremendous amount of gathering lines, transmission lines, and larger pipelines will be running throughout the area. So it will be very difficult to build a lot of buildings and economic development in the future, because you cannot build too close on top of or too close to all of these pipelines. So you're sort of, it's an opportunity cost going forward. You're giving up the opportunity, if you will, for some development into the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, and any of you can respond to this. Same question I asked Dr. Carpenter earlier. If the charge to the 3-member panel on health assessment is to review the draft SGIS and respond to it or comment on it, is that an adequate charge, and can such a panel give a useful response with that description of their role?
I'll try that. No. The SGIS, the last iteration we've seen, of course, doesn't include health effects. And so presumably this 8-page leaked document is the starting point of the health effects piece of what will be folded into the SGIS, kind of like a sidecar added to the motorcycle of the SGIS. However, that document does not include any data. It simply denies that there's an ability to even analyze health effects. Now, that may have, the version that the 3 outsiders have looked at may be different, presumably is different than that. But there has been no attempt to comprehensively go out and seek the data that exists. So we know that that hasn't happened. We have all kinds of data that are waiting to be analyzed from the uncontrolled health experiment being unfolded in Pennsylvania. And so any attempt to understand the health effects would aggressively go out and seek data, not simply review the data that exists, because right now, because fracking is so new, because we've never done it in a densely populated eastern state, we don't have those data just sitting on the shelf waiting to review. We would need to actively go out and seek them. That's why we're asking for to take to pull back the veils of secrecy on this secret review of the secret review, and bring public scrutiny to it. Allow the public itself to be involved in scoping the study, because of all the very important expertise that people who live in these areas have. They know where the springs are. They know where how the water flows. They know where their houses are located. And so very site-specific data need to be included in such a study. And that can only happen when the public are involved together with scientists. We know that participatory research with public involvement is not only democratic, but it actually results in better scientific outcomes. We do better science when the public are involved.
That 8-page document refers to several parts of the draft statement, which I guess was done a few months before the 8-page document was written, and seems to say that those parts describe various potential health harms, but provides for mitigation measures, and therefore there will be no harm to human health.
See, that's factually untrue already. And the DEC has either ignored or chosen to close their eyes to data of families impacted by conventional petroleum development in New York already. We have several case files, fairly recent, since 2006, of people living next to oil or gas fields, especially gas fields lately, developed primarily in tight sand formations where hydraulic fracturing was a part, but not necessarily the most important part. And so the pollution of these people's water and the impacts on their air quality the health issues that they have suffered have literally been buried or ignored by the DEC. And so the very fact that there is a document that exists that says we don't think there are any health impacts means they're ignoring existing data that is here today. So this is where I guess we cross the line from negligence to malfeasance.
Mr. Levine.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, this should be a little better. Dr. Steingraber, were we to complete the sort of comprehensive health impact analysis that you have suggested, what kind of time frame are we talking about?
It can range from a matter of months to a matter of years, and I wouldn't want to put a kind of deadline on it until we began the process. I mean, the data tells you how long it needs to take.
I'm not asking you to set a finite stop date, but given the complexities involved with issues involving fracturing, we could anticipate that that's going to be a fairly lengthy proposition, correct?
It is a lengthy proposition. It is.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Bishop, up in Alberta, where there's been this leakage, the 4% leakage in the flood wells, whose responsibility is it to take care of the mitigation there?
At the moment, Canadian officials are working on that. I don't think they anticipated the problem. From what I've learned, it varies from province to province across Canada, and there's been a little bit higher level of cooperation in Alberta than other places, than, for example, like Quebec and Ontario, where they've actually had to shut down operations to get people's attention. In Alberta, there have been more than 360,000 wells developed, and so it's a pretty mature industry. And so because of that, although it's only a single study, the numbers are not insignificant. But there's been a pretty high degree of cooperation, and I believe that where pressured to do that, the petroleum operators have elected to clean up their mess.
Are those wells all fracking wells? Those 360,000?
Pretty much. They're all based in tight sand formations or shale formations. Yes.
And Dr. Barth, question for you. Generally, when we have environmental regulations proposed, we hear very loudly from industry interests demanding that a formal cost-benefit analysis is mandatory. Here, however, those who are raising the environmental and health concerns are questioning the adequacy of the economic analysis. Would a rule of this consequence, do you think, and magnitude, seem to call for a formal peer review analysis of all the benefits and costs?
Absolutely, and I've been saying that for 4 years.
So how long do you think that would take?
I'm afraid it's pretty much the same answer. You can't really tell until you get into it, but it would require a team of experts, each with individual areas of expertise. And it could take a long time, and it could be quite costly, but I think the taxpayers of New York deserve that kind of a study.
Thank you all for your dedication to the health.
May I add another thing? We've been asking for the comprehensive health impact assessment also for at least 2 years. Had we been told yes, that study would have been done by now. And so this is not an attempt by the scientific community to be obstructionist. We're simply reiterating something that we've asked for all these many years.
Nor did I intend to give any suggestion that was the case. And thank you all. And finally, Dr. Bishop, we're sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you.
May I say one thing? If we were to do these proper studies, and if it would take some time, that's really not so much of a problem, because by then perhaps the price of natural gas would go up and New York State might receive more benefits, and we could get a proper tax proposal in place. Perhaps we could put in a severance tax whereby the revenue would go to the impacted communities and not just the general fund. And we could also develop proper long-term economic development plans for each of the impacted communities, so we would have time to do all of this, and then it would be a win-win for New York. Thank you.
And that sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Engelbrecht.
I'm looking at your testimony here, Dr. Bishop, regarding the apparent lack of consistency and fidelity to the State Uniform Procedures Act, in which you indicate that for 20 years or so, there has been drilling going on without development of appropriate guidance documents and regulations. So I wondered if you could expand on that just a little bit, because it was part of a larger gathering of thoughts that you had to work within a tight time frame on. But it just seems to me that it's worth giving you a chance to expand on it a little bit, because you say here, in what sense is it fair that drillers and their subcontractors were subjected to the shifting sands of the DEC permit conditions for 20 years? We're here talking about the DEC being who we would rely upon to protect the public health going forward. And it seems to me that these past 20 years, the DEC may have in fact not been doing their job in terms of protecting the public health with drilling in the past, and I wonder if that's a predictor for where we go forward. And if so, I'm very disquieted by that.
Okay. First off, if you take a look at Section 560, Title VI, Section 560.3 for definitions, and you look for a definition of process waste, you don't find one. And you take a look at the new proposed regulations in 560.3, it's still not there. That's among the limitations in how those regulations have been developed, or should I say not developed. A definition for brine that is given in that definition section of the regulations says this: brine is synonymous with salt water. Great. So then you go on down to the section that says something about salt water, which used to be paragraph AX. I think it's now been shifted to BB because of some of the additions. And it says salt water is defined to be 250 parts per million or more sodium chloride, or 1,000 parts per million or more of total dissolved solids. In no chemical sense does that really characterize the brines that we have ever seen coming in this state. And yet, according to the brines disposition report, generated and then subsequently lost because I couldn't find it when I foiled it, either in the DEC or with the state library system, even though it was almost certainly written by the brine specialist at that time, Mr. Bradley Field. The brines disposition report suggested that we are disposing already of about 360 million gallons per year of flowback and production brines from the oil and gas industry in New York. That's not an insignificant amount of waste. Detailed tracking procedures aren't really in place. I think that was pretty much shown conclusively by a study done earlier this year by Catherine Nadeau of Environmental Advocates of New York. And in addition, the exemption that exists in Part 364, where they only cover trucking, so that any transport by train, by water, or by air, which I think much less likely, are exempted from any regulation of any kind for transport across New York. These are the kinds of regulations that leave loopholes you can literally drive a truck through, and I think quite a bit of that's probably been going on. So in addition to the fact that there's the potential, although maybe not realized, downside for operators, that they suffer from the possible caprice of a field agent can imagine literally any operating, any permit conditions that he wants, including up to and including things like intermediate casings and better than your average, grouting, concrete, formulations or time waiting on concrete. He can put in anything he wants, really. We've actually seen that they don't really put in much extra that we can point at unless it's an extremely highly visible project. So what I'm getting at then is that we have seen a real dearth of regulatory framework in this state ever since that original hard look in 1992 was finalized. And remember, that initial generic environmental impact statement was started in 1978 and finally adopted in 1992. And now we're trying to do essentially the same kind of process in a period of months rather than those number of years. I think we're just not really going to be able to get all that done in a serious and sober-minded way in such a short time. And what I see in the regulations that are proposed here is that they really weren't able to get it done in such a short time.
And the amount of brine that's been produced is really coming primarily from a relatively small number of wells relative to what is being anticipated going forward.
Well, we still have about 10 or 11,000 producing wells, oil and gas wells in New York State. There's actually been a slight uptick of permits approved in Erie, Chautauqua, Catarocts, and Allegheny counties.
Wells only?
Over the last couple of years. About 240 projects, I think, have been approved in the last year or two. Yeah, so I mean, we're seeing ongoing significant activity. Most of it these days, because the really easy, extraction is done. Most of these operations going into the Clinton, the Medina, the Oriskany, Herkimer, Oneida sandstones, which all need to be hydraulically fractured to be commercially lucrative. So it's not an insignificant problem that the regulation package really never showed up after the informing document. So there we've been waiting for 20 years for a regulations package to show up. Here we don't have the new informing documents even done yet. And because there's a deadline that they want to just stick it in, they stick in the regulations, done or not.
And against all of that backdrop, the DEC essentially is saying, trust us going forward.
Well, yeah, and in spite of the fact, you look at the chapter 2 of the S-Guys where they describe the history of oil and gas development in New York State, they essentially said, well, we've basically had no real problems. And that, again, is factually untrue. And so at the same time they're saying, trust us, they're putting actual abject falsehoods right into their working documents. I find that troubling.
Appropriately so, Doctor. And I think this deserves a closer look from government operations and the procedures perspective on top of the health and environmental process as well. Thank you all. Very, very powerful testimony. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.